Cosatu decided not to protest at the Sun-Met today. Cosatu had threatened a planned protest at the event in Kenilworth if horses owned by Steinhoff boss Markus Jooste were to run. This decision comes after the Horse Racing Association assured Cosatu that no horses will be racing in Jooste's colours. Cosatu has now agreed with Sun-Met that no horses fully owned by Markus will be allowed to race in any colours on Sun-Met Day. The horses that he had fully owned have been withdrawn from the day's events. Now, meanwhile, the Public Servants Association has said it won't disrupt the Sun-Met horse race, but it will hold a solidarity march against the former Steinhoff CEO Markus Jooste. The role in the South African horse racing fraternity, the PSA had previously threatened that it won't disrupt the race, but reports suggest that after meetings with the National Horse Racing Authority, they have a compromise, and there was a compromise and it was reached. And meanwhile, Sun-Met says horses that are part owned by Jooste will be allowed to run under other colours. But Cosatu insists that these horses must, however, have Jooste's share in them and sold by the end of March 2017, as agreed between the Horse Racing Association and Cosatu. And with me in studio is Oliver Dixon, who's a socio-political analyst, and Mr. Ruben Maleka, who's an assistant general manager of the Public Servants Association. Now, I'm going to start with you, Mr. Oliver. Into a point where to talk about the constructs, do you think that there is a construct in how the authority treated the Gupta link cases and the ones that are related to the white monopoly capital?
Yeah, there certainly is a stark contrast. But that contrast doesn't necessarily mean the treatment of, say, the Gupta family or any person who's not white and not linked to white monopoly capital is necessarily unfair. I do think that justice needs to be served on all ends, and if the Guptas are implicated, they deserve to be investigated, and if the investigations show anything, they deserve to be prosecuted. So I don't think it's necessarily unfair on them. Where I think the unfairness comes in is how soft we take it when it comes to white monopoly capital institutions. When the Steinhoff story broke, it didn't make the front page of the Sunday Times. It didn't make the front page of various Sunday newspapers on that day. Sunday newspapers that are directly tied to organizations such as NASPERS, through Media 24, and various other white-owned media houses. And that's because it's so difficult for whiteness to accept within itself that it's flawed and that it will be exposed. So I do think there's a stark contrast in terms of how that's being treated over there. But I do think we've made significant strides towards how towards what we've learned about Markus Jooste, Christo Wiese, and White Person and the people implicated in the Steinhoff saga. I think, for instance, the fact that you know, there's conversations about the asset seizure and the asset freeze of some of these implicated people is an important conversation. But the sad part is it doesn't get highlight rotation such as other stories. So if this had been a black person or a person of color, and generally it would have made front pages, it would have been on high circulations across various media platforms. And I think that's the unfair part on that. But I do think we need to ask more of our authorities and of our media houses in terms of reporting these stories.
Now, Mr. Maleka, we know the Public Association Authority has let the Sun-Met horse race go ahead, and this is what the association said, that it will hold a solidarity march against the former Steinhoff CEO and the role in the South African horse racing fraternity. Can you please elaborate on that, and also to elaborate on what was what was said, or rather the conclusion that was said in the meeting?
Yeah, thank you. You see, the PSA is one of the trade unions that actually we have taken a very hard stance. And obviously, we are very hard on issues of corruption. And from the onset, we've been saying that Steinhoff must come out publicly to say what happened. And obviously, Markus Jooste, obviously, we said clearly from the onset that he cannot continue to benefit from all saga, which include corruption. So, on the issue of the Sun-Met, today, as you can see now, I come from Cape Town. We had a victory march. It's not a solidarity march, but a victory march. And we even ensured that all horses related to Markus Jooste do not participate in the whole horse racing. We had our auditors, we had our chartered accountant, Dominic, there. We made sure that everything that relates to anything that relates to Markus Jooste does not participate in the whole horse racing. So we can assure you and the public that Markus Jooste did not participate. Any horse that relates to him did not participate. Before last night, we had indication from the Horse Racing Authority that there will be about 3 horses on different name, but under his stable. We confirmed on that point to say that should that happen, the PSC will insist on say that there should be no horse racing of any horse that relates to Markus Jooste, and it was confirmed that all his horses are withdrawn from the horse racing.
Now, Oliver, do you think that there's a need for more activist shareholding and vigorous oversight by boards with regards to this Steinhoff allegations?
Yeah, no, certainly, and Steinhoff isn't the first case that points to that. I think KPMG points to that. I think to a large extent McKinsey points to that. So I think it is important that through corporate South Africa strengthens its corporate governance, strengthens those sort of things. But I think the only way really where we will see more transparent activities on boards of directors and through shareholders is if those boards act in public interest. At the moment, boards act in private and capitalist interest towards themselves and not in public interest. So they have no incentive to hold public interest at the top of their priorities. So I think it's important that its corporate governance is changed in terms of how it reflects public interest. And I think once you have majority shareholdership, for instance, through a public fund, through an organization that really has public interest at heart, then you will see transparency thereof. I think PIC was largely, voiceless when it came to the board on Steinhoff, just because its shareholdership isn't significant enough for it to have that sort of outcry, or maybe just PIC itself is more concerned with capital protection than it is with public servants in that instance.
Now, we know that it has already lost of nearly close to 194 billion rands, and it's also under investigation here in South Africa and Germany. Do you think it should be running at this point while it's still under investigations? There's also a lot of allegations that keep on coming up and up. Should Steinhoff be running at this point? So
various transgressions call for various types of actions. So you don't just shut down someone for a transgression. Certain transgressions call for a fine if that's in the legislature regarding to that, and certain transgressions call for a complete shutdown. I think in various instances, through Steinhoff's own admission, through accounting irregularities, it calls for extensive fines because there was actual material loss there. So we need to be punitive in that sense in recovering those funds before you shut down. If you shut down Steinhoff, how are we going to recover those funds? Specifically, the 12.5 billion that Steinhoff lost. So that money must be recoverable, and so you issue fines and punishment of equivalence to that, because when you shut them down, you lose the opportunity to do that. But once the investigations conclude and the transgressions are grave, far exceeding the gravity of just fines, and once we've been able to recover the money, then you can have a discussion about shutting down these institutions, because I think the people who will suffer the most are the poor people whose money invested in there through public funds.
Now, Mr. Maleka, the Public Servant Association had previously threatened that it would disrupt the race. But that was an agreement reached with the National Horse Racing Authority. Where did it stop, and how did it get into that agreement? And also with Cosatu, they also cancelled the protest that they allegedly said they would protest at the Met Sun. What were the agreements? What was said, and how is this supposed to be solved, and how is this going to be done?
Yeah, firstly, you'd appreciate that there are three things that happens in the whole saga. The issue is the issue of Markus Jooste himself, Steinhoff, obviously the issue of transgression to corporate governance, and also the possibility of tax fraud. So for us, when we said that we'll disrupt the issue of SunMed, we realized that Markus Jooste personally is going to benefit by his horses running at the SunMed. So during the course of our discussions with National Horse Racing Association, it was agreed that should there be an agreement, remember this as a bigger trade union in the whole country as PSA, we're also concerned about the workers themselves, because the whole issue of the race in Sunmet, it includes more than 3,000 workers themselves that are looking forward to benefit from the horse racing. But our main focus was that should any horse that relates to Markus Jooste, we would have ensured that that race is stopped. Because we cannot continue to see that Markus Jooste benefit from the whole issue of Sunmet, while it's actually one of the guys that has made sure that our corporate governance is undermined and public servants' pension money is also compromised. One can indicate the fact that corporate governance in South Africa, for instance, is an issue that is under microscope, looking at the question of corruption. But Markus Jooste, personally, as an individual, as PSA, we said, if he's going to benefit from the whole issue of Sunmet, the whole event should be cancelled. It is good that prior to that event, there were authorities that even approached us to say that they want to resolve the whole issue of Markus Jooste, all his sources be removed. He is not part of the Sunmet, and therefore, as a trade union responsible, we felt that as workers that are going to be there, 3,000 of the poor people that are going to participate, and obviously, an event of that nature is mostly the poor who would come and sell things in their stores and everything that benefit in the whole situation. Therefore, as the PSA, we felt that we had a victory because Markus Jooste horses were withdrawn.
Now, the company's admission of wrongdoing has prompted to an 85% share price that slided and wiped more than $10 billion of its value and the retailers. Now, is the plan, or rather, is there a possible plan of the PSA, or rather to plan a class of action lawsuit to recover the $7 billion that it has lost from Steinhoff?
Yes. We are at a preliminary investigation as the PSA. We are at a stage where we have obviously found some of the irregularities relating to the issue of Steinhoff and Markus Jooste himself. And obviously, we are concerned about the former CFO who's not coming out to also indicate what is the position. And we are also looking at Christophe himself to say, why is he not coming out on the whole circle to say, what is his position on why Steinhoff have manipulated their own financial statements and books. And we can all see that if Markus Jooste is the chairperson, and we have the same board, including Christophe as part of the board, and making investments and manipulating even the tax that they should be paying to South African authorities. So the whole issue of Steinhoff should not only be looked as an issue that relates to us as a trade union. It's an issue that calls upon all authorities, including SARS, CPIC, and everybody involved as South Africans, to come and investigate to say what is happening. As the PSA, we're taking a very strong stance. We are at a preliminary investigation. There are some findings that we have, and upon conclusion of our investigation, there is much possibility that we are going to take an action in terms of taking the individuals and some of the corporate into a question through the courts.
Now, Steinhoff has already lost the 194 billion rand, rand in value in the fallout of these allegations. And does the PCAA think, or have, rather in a way to say it has costed the public service pension fund at 12.5 billion rand? How is this? How is the PSA as planned to pursue getting back this 12.5 billion rands that it has lost from Steinhoff?
As I indicated, we are at a infant stage to do investigations. Our auditors are investigating. We've got full-time employed accountants within the PSA. We've got our own attorneys that are working on the whole saga of Steinhoff. And once there's any findings through the investigation that there's irregularities and some of the things that happened that needs further way of looking in the sense of prosecution, the PSA will not hesitate. Therefore, we are on the issue of Steinhoff. We'll make sure that the whole truth comes out, and anybody involved is going to be prosecuted.
Now, Oliver, isn't it ironic that the banks, instead of going ahead with the liquidation order for Jooste's horses and his other racing company asset, that signed an agreement with him to continue to the race, to race his horses, so that he can pick up a payback from the proceeds of this race?
Look, liquidation happens in an instance where someone can't afford to service their debt and the holdings that they have are insufficient. But the important part here is that Markus Jooste has a personal liability debt he needs to repay and needs to be recovered. And that money needs to be recovered from him. So the bank, instead of just outright punishing him, or the bank just going ahead with liquidation, need to engage in a conversation in, yo, how can we get this money from you? Because this is actual money you need to, when liquidation happens, he has no liability to repay that money because he's been declared liquidated, right? But before they go ahead with this, they realize, oh, this guy actually has an income stream that can be used to service this debt. And once there's income stream, it's the horses, right? He needs to make money from the horses. So this is not going into Jooste's pocket. Markus Jooste isn't going to make any money personally from this. But if money were to be made, that money would directly go towards servicing this particular debt before they go ahead with liquidation. So they may go ahead with the liquidation order after the fact.
Now, this case appears to be one of rewarding the defaulter for the bad debt. Now, do you think only the white monopoly can be accorded such treatment by the banks because white monopoly controls them?
I don't think Markus Jooste personally is being rewarded anything here. I think he's not even been given a lifeline. Like I said just now, he's not benefiting directly financially from this, right? Because he has to repay the money. I think, and if that's the case, the liquidation is going to go ahead, and hopefully PSA finds evidence strong enough to criminally and civilly prosecute. And when criminal action and civil action takes place and is found guilty, he should then go to jail. So there's no reward being spoken of just yet because this case hasn't yet seen the day of light in the court of law. So it needs to wait till it gets there. Otherwise, we can't preemptively speculate about it just yet. I think justice needs to go. We need to wait for the due processes of justice to serve throughout before we start making value judgments about any sort of reward or the severity of the punishment he's receiving.
Now, Mr. Maleka, your comment before we close and your points.
Yeah, thank you. I think where we are right now as PSA, we'll be concluding our investigation, and we're calling a calm to all our public servants to say, we know that there will be panic among public servants to think that, no, this has happened, perhaps one should leave the public service. But one can be assured that with the PSA in place, we are going to make sure that nobody, including all our pensioners and the current, that they're going to have any direct impact in terms of their pension. Therefore, we are going to fully investigate the whole issue of Steinhoff. We are going to make sure that everybody that is involved irregularly is brought to the book.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it here. And that was Mr. Oliver Dixon, who's a socio-political analyst, and Robin Maleka, who is an assistant general at the Public Servant Association, giving us more brief report on this Steinhoff allegations and saga that is currently going right now.